Well, hello everyone, and welcome to our community education webinar for consumers, carers and community members. My name's Shyla and I'm the CEO of Palliative Care Queensland. Today's topic is about bereavement during the holidays and very fitting for this time of year. So thank you to everyone that's registered and is joining this webinar today. So I'd like to start the webinar by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land of wherever we meet today and pay respect to elders past, present and emerging, and extend that respect to anyone with Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander heritage attending today's webinar. I'm actually in Brisbane, so I'm on the Yagara and the Turrbal people's land up here, and I invite you to pop in the chat your name and your postcode or suburb of where you're from, and also what First Nations lands you're also on today as well, so we can share that across with everyone. So simply go down to the bottom of your toolbar. There should be a chat function there, and just pop that in. And I can see Trish has already done that, so thank you so much. As a great example there. So pop that in, and that gives us a chance to get to know everyone that's online today. This is an optional thing. If you don't feel like you want to do that, absolutely feel free not to do it as well. So it's very open to having a discussion with everyone today. So Palliative Care Queensland is the peak body for palliative care across Queensland. We believe that the way we care for our dying is a significant indicator of the kind of society that we are. We have three organisational priorities, and that is that all Queenslanders should be able to live every day until their last, are able to have a dignified death regardless of illness, age, culture or location, have access to a supportive social network at the end phase of life, and the choice of quality palliative care. So that's the purpose of having open discussions with experts today and with all of you to start the discussions around end of life and normalise this for everyone and how we can support each other and build compassionate communities with our networks around us. So just a little bit of housekeeping for today's session. So really at the bottom of the session, you'll see there's a chat bar and there's also a Q&A function. So in the chat area is where you can put a chat in there. Now, I know that many of you are writing where you're from, which is fabulous. I'd just encourage you to also think about the topic that we're talking about today. So today we're discussing bereavement during the holidays. And something that comes up a lot for all of us is, wow, how did it get to December already? It's been an exhausting year for many of us. So maybe if you think of one self-care thing that you're planning to do during the holidays, what's one little activity? So an activity that I'm planning to do as a self-care activity is to go to the beach. I'm really looking forward to getting my feet in the water, touching the sand and just having that sensation there and just taking some deep breaths just to relax into the holidays and taking my mind away from all the busyness of the year just for a moment, if that's possible. So thinking about self-care activities, if you've got anything you're willing to share in that space, it's a lovely thing to consider during the holidays. Caring for each other, but caring for yourself as well. So we'll have our two wonderful guest speakers give a presentation and talk about the different topic today, and then we'll do a Q&A, a question and answer. So there's a Q&A function as well in the bar, in the bottom bar of your Zoom function there. So if you've got any questions, just write them up in that area and I'll ask them to our guest speakers as well today. And if we don't get to them all today, then we will send you some responses in the email follow-up from this session as well. So thank you all for participating, and I can already see some beautiful things coming through on the chat. So I'm hoping you're all getting to read them and share them as well. So it's a delightful opportunity to get to know each other in that space, and thanks for engaging that way as well. So I'll start by introducing our first speaker to you. So our first speaker is Jackie Tarabay. Jackie is a specialist bereavement counsellor, clinical supervisor and trainer with extensive experience in development, delivering and coordination of support groups, education training programs and courses at the Australian Centre for Grief and Bereavement. Now, one of the magical worlds that we live in today enables us to get two Victorian people to participate openly and to, share their knowledge and wisdom in this space today. So thank you so much. We know you guys are very busy in this space. So I'll now hand over to Jackie from Australian Centre for Grief and Bereavement.
Thank you, Shiloh, for that. One of my self-care, hopefully, is to actually get out of Melbourne and come to Queensland. That's my aim. So I guess I'll share my screen now. Okay. Oops. Okay. So thank you, everybody, and thank you, Shiloh, for inviting me to today. So my aim is to work through some of these outcomes and give you a simple overview of the impact that grief can have on our lives and why is it so difficult for us to sit with these holiday periods while we're grieving. I'll also talk about some of the factors that can contribute to that, look at some coping strategies, some rituals in the way that we can honour our deceased, and a couple of self-care strategies, which I know, Shiloh, you've already mentioned, which is great. So here is about what is grief. Grief is a multifaceted experience. And when I say multifaceted, what I'm meaning is that it can have an impact on these 6 different areas of our life. So it has an impact on how we think, how we feel, also has an impact on our physicality. We then go through a place where we start to question our own belief systems. And for some, this could be also addressing some of these big existential questions, meaning, what is my purpose? Why am I here? It has an impact on our social support, meaning some people often feel like people treat them differently after they have lost someone. And that typically comes from most people don't know what to say. So what they tend to do is either walk away from the person who is grieving, which can be incredibly isolating. And when you think about all of that, it has an impact on our behaviour. So this is a slide that I've put together, and these are some of the responses I've heard from the experts. And the experts for me are my beautiful clients that I see. So as you can see, I won't go through them all, but these are some of the responses that I have heard from people that I am so blessed to sit opposite and sit in their pain with them as they work through their grief. It's really important here, as you can see, that grief is so unique. And if you think about your own fingerprint, it is different. Not everybody will have, no one has the same fingerprint. So therefore our grief experience will be very, very different. So it's really important to honour those differences. So why is it so hard? Why can it be so difficult to actually enjoy these holiday periods while we're grieving? And as you can see here, firstly, when you think about Christmas, there is such an increase of activity. I don't know about you, but in our household, there's, putting up the Christmas tree, it's buying Christmas gifts, it's baking, it's sending Christmas cards if some people still do that. And there's this huge expectation, because it's Christmas, because it's a holiday season, that we should be feeling happy. And that's not necessarily the case when we mark anniversaries or holidays like Christmas, because what that does for us, it really reminds us that the person that we have lost is no longer here in this physical form. So we can't see them, we can't touch them, we can't smell them. And what that does, it can leave a really big hole in our heart. And Christmas is exhausting anyway, with all this flurry of activity, but when we're grieving, it just adds another layer, because we are carrying this grief in our bodies, in our minds, in our hearts. So it's really exhausting. And also, when you think about Christmas, what meaning do we attach to Christmas? Just think about that for one moment. What does it mean? And when I speak to a lot of my clients and when I reflect on Christmas, for me, it's really about coming together and celebrating as a family. So when you have a family member that's no longer there, again, it creates this huge hole in our hearts. And it's a reminder that they are no longer or will no longer share any of our holidays with us. And the other thing is, it's like, I often hear my clients say, I wish I could stand on top of a mountain and scream out to the world and say, do you know what's happened? And with this commercialization of Christmas and the big sales, they often say to me, I don't care about the latest gift that's out there. My world will never be the same. What we find also with Christmas is that can really resurface some family conflict. I don't know what it is with weddings and funerals and Christmas time. It can resurface some family conflict, and then our grief can just be intensified even more. And one of the biggest things that I hear often is that people don't know what to say. So all I can say to you is we cannot underestimate the power of human kindness. One of the things that I say is whatever you do, if you can listen and listen more to the person who is grieving and take the pressure off yourself to try and fix it, because there is nothing to fix. They are grieving and there is a function to grief, and that is to help us integrate the loss into our life the best way we know how. My advice would also be is to never start your sentence with at least. At least they're not suffering anymore. At least you had a Christmas with them. Anything that's starting with at least takes the person away from their grief experience. They will shut it down and they will internalize it. And that's not helpful. If you don't know what to say, simply say, I don't know what to say, but I am here for you. Some of the factors that can intensify our grief is when we have lost someone, it could potentially be the first Christmas without the person in their life. And that is a really painful experience, like I mentioned earlier. It just highlights the fact that the person is no longer here in that physical form. Some people will also have multiple deaths, and in particular with COVID and this pandemic, I've had lots of clients who have experienced multiple deaths, which can intensify their grief. There's also the additional stresses, and I use COVID as an example because so many people have either lost their jobs, causing financial problems, no longer being able to socialise or see their close network of family and friends because of borders closing, or just even in your own city, in particular in Melbourne, because of the amount of lockdowns that we've had. All of these factors can really intensify our grief. And what I heard a lot from clients is, in particular, their social network. They really missed their social network while people were in lockdown. And one of the things that I would suggest is, when you think about your social networks, in particular with this holiday period, I want you to reflect and think about who are the people in your life who are the doers. And they're the people who are happy to come in and go, right, I can buy the food for you. I'm happy to put up the Christmas tree. These are the people that I call the doers. They're your friends that will do things. Then think about the people who are the listeners. Who are your friends that you can actually talk about the person that has died, and they're really comfortable sitting in the rubble with you? And then think about the people who allow you to have a rest from your grief. And that can be people who can make you laugh, who will actually take you out for dinner or go to the movies. So one strategy I would suggest is think about those who are the doers, the listeners, and those who, what did I say? The doers, the listeners, and those who allow you to rest, which is giving yourself a break from your grief. Because what we know time and time again, research tells us, when we have a satisfying network of family and friends, most do not need counselling. And I just wanted to touch on this. I know it might seem a little bit strange, but there is a value in grief. Grief can really slow the process down, meaning it allows us to slow down. It allows us to actually think about, what are the things that I need to do, and let go of the things that I don't need to do. And it really helps us. This slowing down process can really have a huge impact, not just on our mind, but also on our bodies. And it allows us to actually sit with our pain and tend to our grief. Because sadly, we can't go around our grief, over our grief, or under our grief. It's about having the courage to meet it and tend to our grief. So now I'm going to talk about, how do we cope during the holidays? And what I will be talking about will not be of any surprise. It is stripping everything back and really going back to the basics. And the first thing is giving yourself the permission to show up for yourself. And that is, when I say show up, we show up to meetings, catching up with friends, doing the things that we need to do around the house for others. But it is so important that we give ourselves the permission to show up for ourselves. So that is really about self-compassion, being kind to yourself. And don't force yourself to be happy. Well, this is Christmas, I should be happy. Take out any language that says should, could, would, and check in with yourself and see what it is that you need, which is allowing yourself to set some clear boundaries for yourself. Practical things is taking care of yourself in terms of eating nourishing foods. If you can even step outside and get some fresh air, go for walks, even if it's just around the block. Nourish your mind and your body. Try and get some sleep. Limit your intake of alcohol. These are the basic things that we often forget to do, and they can really have a huge impact if we just start implementing those types of strategies. And it's okay to just allow yourself to experience whatever it is that you are experiencing, and put no expectations on yourself to be any way but what it is that you need to be, which is really living in that moment. So do things that are doable. So that's really, instead of putting your expectations really high, lower your expectations and give yourself the permission to do that. And if you struggle with taking care of yourself, I want you to think about, if you had your best friend who had recently lost someone, what would you say to your best friend? How would you treat your best friend? Just think about that. You may want to choose some traditions that you would like to introduce, and there may be some type of traditions or rituals that you don't want to do. Some of the things that you can do is ask for people for what you want. And if you want someone to simply talk about the person that has died, give them the permission, because often people will feel like they don't want to say anything because they're so frightened of hurting you or making you sad. And the reality is that we are sad anyway, because we are going through this grief experience, and Christmas time just reminds us of the person that's no longer here. So some of the suggestions could be, you could ask everybody to potentially write a Christmas card to the person that has died, or they can write some memories and maybe come together and share those memories over lunch or over dinner. Maybe it could be as simple as lighting a candle in memory of the person that has died. I've had some clients where they set a table at lunch and they put the photo of the deceased person at the table. And so these are just some suggestions that you can do, but just sit with that and ask yourself, what would work for you? what it is, what are some of the rituals that you would like, and share them with people. I really love this quote: when words are inadequate, have a ritual. Here they've got balloons where people have written on balloons and writing something to the deceased and releasing the balloons. So there's a number of rituals that you can do. I've also got a few more ideas. Some people would like to actually cook all the things that the person that has died, they like to cook their favourite meals and create a hamper and then give it to an organisation that needs the food, which I think is a really beautiful idea. Some people have bought beautiful ornaments and used the ornaments on the Christmas tree. Some people together as a family create a memory box. And another idea is you can write a hello again letter. So that is basically not saying goodbye, but a hello again. And that's the idea of, we know that death can end a life, but it doesn't have to end the relationship. So it's learning to continue to have a relationship or a bond with the deceased, but in a different way. And that's something that you can do, is writing a hello again letter. Here I've got just a couple of slides on self-care. And if I ask you to think about, when I say the word self-care, what is your association to self-care? And this came up for me a couple of years ago when I had to present at a conference all around self-care. And to be really honest, I actually felt like such a fraud, because I thought, I actually don't do this very well. And when I sat and thought about self-care, the association that I had with self-care was that it's indulgent, it's selfish. And I really had to sit with that and understand, where does that come from? And I really thought, I really need to walk my talk. And so when I think about self-care now, and I really love this quote, and in particular, I love here where it says, it is an active and powerful choice. So it is a choice that we make. So just think about that. What does it mean for you, and how often do you do self-care, and why it is so important? So here is, I want you to think about your self-care, and just think about, what are things that you are prepared to not give up. And I like to call these our non-negotiables. And I think of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And what are, when he talks about this pyramid, it is the physiological. So it's food, sleep, health. That is our absolute foundation. So what is your foundation? What are your non-negotiables that you are not prepared to give up for anybody? And this is around showing up for yourself. So we know that when we learn to fill up our own cup first, then we can serve others. So just sit quietly and think, what are your non-negotiables that you are not prepared to give up for anyone? And here is a really simple example. I've got here the lifesavers, and I was listening to this man speak about this, and he spoke about how you can do this in 5 minutes or in 60 minutes, or you can do this in 60 seconds or 60 minutes. So he talks about the savers. As you can see, S is for silence. Sitting in silence, and that might mean sitting in silence for 5 big breaths. Affirmations. What affirmations do you want to tell yourself every day? And then visualize what your day looks like. Exercise, and that might be, you might go, I'm going to do 10 sit-ups and 10 push-ups, and that's it. And then read your affirmations out loud. And scribing is potentially writing 3 things that you are grateful for. It is a simple suggestion. I quite like it. It's a quick reminder. So I challenge you to think about, what are your non-negotiables, and do you have the courage to show up for yourself? So I want to thank you for your time. And now I think it's over to you, Shyla. Thank you, everyone.
Jackie, thank you so much. I don't know, first of all, you're very soothing with your voice. It was just so relaxing and beautiful to hear you talk about these topics. And I have scribbled down so many little handy hints that I feel could be put around my office on little post-it notes. So fabulous. Thank you so much. It's just a delight. Lots of handy hints.
You're welcome. Thank you so much.
Lovely. So now I'd like to introduce you to another wonderful person. This is Cheryl Holmes, and Cheryl is the Chief Executive Officer at Spiritual Health Association. And she has extensive training and professional experience in healthcare, spiritual care, and organisational change and management. Cheryl completed a Master's in 2014, focusing on management and leadership, and commenced a PhD in 2016 at La Trobe University, Melbourne, Australia, exploring the narratives shaping spiritual care in public hospitals. So really exciting to have you participate in this webinar, Cheryl, and to share your knowledge and wisdom around this such important topic. And I think the segue between the two of you is really exciting. So thank you so much. I'll hand over to you now.
Thank you. And I'm just trying to get my screen up so I can, let me just get here. There we go. Oh, good. Well, thank you, Shyla, and thank you, Jackie. Oh my goodness, I just feel like there was such a rich diversity and such practical wisdom in what you've just shared. Yeah, like Shyla, I feel like there's so many things I just want to go through again, and yes, have to confess as well to being one of those people who talks a good talk around self-care, and it can be so hard to actually take it seriously and really show up for ourselves. So thank you so much for that reminder. As I said, I'm not going to go through this. I just a quick slide about SHA, and when we do share the slides, you'll be able to read about us a bit. Jackie has offered a really comprehensive presentation unpacking how grief can impact us, understanding bereavement, and providing, as I said, just such helpful strategies. I thought in this presentation we might think a little bit about the experience a bit more, and I'd like to introduce some thinking about spiritual health, just to take that a little deeper, and the ways that spiritual health can be an avenue for further support to us. It was interesting, Jackie, talking about that expectation around being happy, and that sense we have around Christmas of having to show up for a good time. And it's amazing just thinking that it's only 10 days until Christmas is upon us. And I wonder how just looking at something like this makes you feel. There is the expectation to be jolly, and the expectation that we want to gather and to celebrate. And for some people that's true, and for others, and for all sorts of reasons, so many of which Jackie named, it's just not how it feels. A close friend of mine died during Melbourne's long lockdown last year. I've spent a lot of time since then with his wife, who is also a really close friend of mine. And most of that has been on Zoom and WhatsApp because of the number of lockdowns we've had here in Melbourne. This will be her second Christmas without Jonathan. And a few weeks ago, when I was speaking with her, she just had no idea about what she wanted to do for Christmas, how she wanted to spend that time. And I think that can be so hard because my experience is that just can change from day to day, and sometimes multiple times in the one day. The smallest things can become a trigger to such deep sadness and sense of loss. So it's really important, I think, that we remember that it's okay to not be okay. And I wanted to read a little bit from a book called It's Okay That You're Not Okay. And I think in this book, Megan Devine captures the experience really well. Here's what she says. Here's what I most want you to know. This really is as bad as you think. No matter what anyone else says, this sucks. What has happened cannot be made right. What is lost cannot be restored. There is no beauty here inside this central fact. Acknowledgement is everything. You're in pain, it can't be made better. The reality of grief is far different from what others see from the outside. There is pain in this world that you can't be cheered out of. You don't need solutions. You don't need to move on from your grief. You need someone to see your grief, to acknowledge it. You need someone to hold your hands while you stand there in blinking horror, staring at the hole that was your life. Some things cannot be fixed. They can only be carried. Jackie's given us some really great examples and talked about how some of this can be carried, both by ourselves and by those around us. And if you're someone who is supporting someone who is bereaved, ways of enabling that carrying. These strategies addressed our physical health, our mental health, emotional health, social health, and our spiritual health. Jackie covered it all so amazingly. And I want to take a little bit more time just to talk about spiritual health, because it's not something that we talk a lot about or give much attention to. Our spiritual health is about being so in touch with who we are, our inner selves, that we are able to identify what we need to connect with, to feel a deep sense of belonging, love, acceptance, and purpose. In grief and loss, we use phrases like, my heart feels heavy, I'm broken-hearted, I feel sick at heart, I've lost my heart. And in sympathy, we can say, my heart goes out to you. My heart bleeds for you. Spiritual health is about matters of the heart and the soul. How do we connect to that place within ourselves? To connect to that place takes really deep listening. This comes from a resource. It's about, it comes from an Aboriginal idea of deep listening. And I want to just read this. We are like the tree standing in the middle of a bushfire sweeping through the timber. The leaves are scorched and the tough bark is scarred and burnt. But inside the tree, the sap is still flowing, and under the ground, the roots are still strong. Like that tree, we have endured the flames and we still have the power to be reborn. I want to invite you to think about the ways you might practice self-care, nurture it through your spiritual health and through deep listening. At Spiritual Health Association, we've created a tool to help that process of deep listening. And I want to walk you through a few of the questions. Just take a moment with each question to breathe and reflect. I'll read each question and allow time for 3 deep breaths. How do I feel when I take loving care of myself? What do I notice about my connection to self and others when I feel tired and overwhelmed? When I feel connected to my heart and soul, how does this change my experience of life? Thank you all for stepping through that with me. And perhaps when it comes to our to-do list in the next week, we can change how we think about what's ahead. How we self-care and how we care for others could look just a little different. And I noticed in the chat before, Terry mentioned about presence with a CE rather than presence with TS. I think this picks that up as well. And also Jackie's strategy or thought around cooking a meal for the person, cooking the things that they loved and then giving that, donating food, like that just shifts our whole focus and our whole way of being. And if we're supporting someone who is bereaved, we have the opportunity to be the light. And at times, as the person who is bereaved, we can also be the light. I guess there's many resources. This is just another one that I came across just recently. So many resources, books and strategies for giving attention to our spiritual health. That source of meaning, purpose and connection that is unique to each one of us. So I want to encourage you to find the safe space within and the safe space with others where you can say what's real. In the days ahead, it's okay to not be okay. And it's also okay to be okay. And that may change from day to day or from hour to hour. So thank you for this opportunity. And Shyla, I'll hand back to you.
Thank you so much. I think this has just been a world of wisdom listening to both of you and hearing such beautiful things. I think people would be experiencing this space in so many different ways. And I think you've both brought really practical strategies around this, and also normalizing it for many people. I love that it's okay not to be okay, but it's also okay to be okay. I think they're both really great ways of describing this space. So just encouraging everyone to pop any questions that you've got now to our beautiful speakers around anything that this may have opened up, or ideas or suggestions or questions in that space. So pop them in the Q&A area. And I see Terry has popped some in there, so we'll start with those. Thank you so much, Terry. Really appreciate that. So the first one's for you, Jackie. Terry asks, he says, I'm curious that you often use the term deceased regarding the person. From your experience, are there cultural sensitivities around using the terms dying, death, died, the person who has died, that sort of language around this space? Really interested in your experience in that space. So first to you, Jackie, and then I might ask that also to Cheryl. Love to hear both your opinions.
Thank you, Terry, and thanks, Shiloh. So I'm really mindful of using the word deceased when I'm doing presentations, because we don't want to make the assumption that the person that has died is a loved one. So that's why we've been taught to really refer to the person as the deceased so I use that when I'm training. But if I'm sitting opposite someone who has lost someone through death, we really encourage people not to shy away from the D words such as death, dying and deceased. And the whole idea of using such concrete language is because the first task is to help our clients accept the reality of the loss, and that's by using concrete language like the D words, death, dying and deceased. I hope I've answered that for you.
Beautiful, thanks so much. And that's really interesting around the loved one concept, because I think that's often a way that people sort of utilize the language there. But you're right, there's a lot of assumptions in that space as well. So really good on that area. And Cheryl, I know we've talked a bit about the S word as well, spirituality in that space. So I might hand it over to you just to discuss a bit about language.
I think language is so important, but yeah, and it's the don't mention the S word and don't mention the D word. But yeah, look, I totally agree with what you said, Jackie. And I was really conscious, Jackie, of you using the term lost a bit. And that really struck me as well, as because that sense of if you lose something, it's sort of a bit you're a bit careless or something to have lost something. Yeah, I thought that was a really interesting word to use, and I'd be interested in a conversation about that as well. But yeah, I think as much as possible, trying to be as clear as possible around death and dying, and the person has died. As Jackie said, it is about really bringing home the reality.
I think it's so true in that space, isn't it? And I think sometimes the language, some things also, I know with me, like, sometimes I just say things and I hear myself say it and I think, oh, hang on, that's not the right word. But I think it's also that that's okay. We all do our best and we're okay in this space. I think that's a key thing that, I find, I try to self-care for myself in that space if I might get it wrong sometimes. But it is hard. I know that we've got the C word for cancer, the D word for dying. We've got so many words, isn't there, that we avoid, or we second guess ourselves a lot in that space. And I think lost is another one that's tricky. Jackie, what's your thinking around that space?
So I just need a little bit more clarification. What are you referring to? Like when I use the word lost, as in why I use the word loss?
I love the way you said before, someone that you were saying when you were sitting in front of people and they may have lost someone, or someone that died recently, in that language around there. So even just the way that we might use those words, and just any of your thinking around just language and words. So death, dying, lost, loss, all of those sort of words.
Terry's saying also the D word for divorce. I love it. Yes. Yep. Look, it's interesting, I guess, because here in Melbourne, and I don't know whether you've experienced this too, Cheryl, you know, with so many people, there are so many non-death related losses. So if I'm talking about different grief theories and models, I use the word death, but any of these models that I'm referring to, it's about any type of loss. So it's loss through divorce, loss of separation, loss of identity, loss of innocence. It's not just loss through death. And in particular, when I think about our aged care clients, there's so many non-death related losses that they will go through. How do they accept this loss? How do they work through the pain and suffering of this loss? How do they adjust all the internal, external and spiritual adjustments that they're experiencing through a non-death related loss? So it's just mindful of recognising that we're not just talking about a loss through death, because there's so many other losses.
I think that's really important, Jackie, that sense of legitimising the depth and the weight of other losses that people can be carrying through all sorts of experiences. Yeah.
It's so true, and that links also to what Douglas has just popped in the chat. It's that change, you know, what the change or the impermanence of life and the way that things change constantly. And it might be a change in a relationship, or it might be that someone died, but there are a lot of changes that experience. I think the loss that people experience when they move and go into aged care and different environments around them as well. And so I think that impermanence and change and loss and grief of all that change is such a huge thing. So recognizing a lot of people are experiencing that during this time of year, you know, it's compounding, isn't it? That must feel a huge thing for a lot of people. And the distance, I think, definitely with COVID. And Terry's got another question up there around COVID. And I think we're all experiencing COVID very differently. And obviously Queensland has experienced it very differently to Victoria. And we're trying to grapple in Queensland with what might be coming and what that might look like for us in this space, which is very different to other states' experiences and internationally as well. So Terry asks, can you say something more about how the COVID pandemic and our isolation from others, including those who may have died, and we have not been able to be close to them during their dying phase? So how this may have compounded our grief and loss, and or any additional strategies and approaches and rituals regarding these? Great question. So I might ask that first to Cheryl and then over to Jackie.
Yeah, there's a lot in that, isn't there? And you know, and look, and I talked about my own experience. Like a really, really dear friend of ours died last year, and you know, we were at the point where only 20 were able to be at his funeral, and my husband and I both went to the funeral. But what was missing about that was, you know, apart from the fact that, you know, this was somebody who would have had a big funeral and so many people who wanted to say goodbye, but we also couldn't gather afterwards. And so that whole ritual of storytelling, of sharing the, oh, do you remember when? That was totally missing. And so I guess, you know, I think one of the things for us has been being mindful of when are those opportunities to actually gather and do those moments of, you know, that becomes a ritual of sharing the stories and the memories and the I loved Jackie, I loved that hello again. You know, there were so many things that you mentioned that were such rich sort of ideas for reconnecting both with each other and with the person who's died. So, you know, I feel like I need to go back to all of those, as I said, and trying to sort of think about, I mean, there are so many ways in which we need to do that. And I think a start for that in terms of ritualising is the gathering, the eating, and that community that has been, for us in Melbourne, that has been so missing and is still, you know, there's still a lot of hesitation around that. you know, we are still in the pandemic. So I think this needs more and more thinking through what are the markers that we're going to use nationally at state levels to actually ritualize what we have all been through.
Well said, definitely. Yeah, I did write the hello again down. I thought, and also Jackie, I'm pretty sure it's Jackie who mentioned when words are inadequate, add a ritual. I thought powerful statement, beautiful. Jackie, over to you.
Well, you know, it's interesting talking about this whole pandemic, and I think what has happened is that it has really had an impact on our mourning, which is the rituals and ceremonies that we would do. As you were saying, Cheryl, we come together, we will have a wake or we'll have a memorial service, and all of a sudden all those rituals have been taken away from us, which then creates this sense of isolation, that I'm alone in my grief experience. That's what the pandemic has done. And in addition to that, what I've heard so often from my clients is when they've had their own grief experience, their own loss, they felt that during the pandemic, they actually couldn't reach out to their family and friends because they were experiencing their own non-death related losses, because the pandemic was so new and terrifying for us all, which created this sense of uncertainty, which really that's an illusion to think that we have any certainty. Sorry to break the news, but you know, it was right there in front of us. I think we're all confronted with this, you know, our own mortality. So it really had an impact. And on the other end of it, the extreme, I also heard people speaking about when they attended a funeral online. And I had that experience of attending a funeral online because I had my auntie die in Queensland, and I attended ready to roll, and I created this ritual where I lit a candle just to get myself in this moment. And then I forgot it was a bloody time difference. So then I had to go, okay, stop. But what was interesting was it was quite surreal watching something online. And then I spoke to other people who had to attend a funeral online, and they actually felt that it gave them the permission to actually grieve in a way that they wouldn't have if they were in person, which I thought that really highlighted the difference. And this particular person was a male, and to be emotive, he felt a lot more comfortable doing it in his own private home than he would if he was there face to face. But yeah, I think what's happening is it's the importance for us to actually create our own personal rituals, because it is a part of the mourning process. So if we can't do it by attending the way that we used to, it's important that we create something for ourselves.
Yeah, really beautiful. And I think that whole non-judgment of other people's rituals, and I love hearing what other people do on different rituals, and I learn so much, and I think, oh, what a great idea. I'd love to do that myself. So I think there's a lot of validating that we can do in rituals that people have, and it's such a big part of this space. And there's no time limit on rituals. You know, everyone is different, everyone experiences their ways differently. So I think during the holidays, you know, this period for people, maybe you've all both just shared so much already. I think what's one thing that if you know your neighbour or a community member, a community group that you're involved in, and you know someone is experiencing bereavement during this holiday period, what's one little handy hint that you might think that you could do about reaching out to them? So I might start with Jackie and then over to Cheryl.
You know, you hit the nail on the head, Shiloh. It's about reaching out to them. You know, when you say to someone who is grieving, just let me know what I can do for you, is problematic, because it's just another layer for them where they think, oh, now I have to think. Whereas my suggestion would be to do not underestimate the power of human kindness. So whether it's baking something, whether it's just dropping something over, whether it's just going over there and mowing their lawn, it is, or the smallest thing, by just sitting and going, just want to check in and see how you are feeling, because I know, and you mentioned the person that has died, even offering a space to share some memories, really simple, and it's just the power of human kindness.
Beautiful and so simple in that space. Thank you, Cheryl.
Oh, I love that, Jackie. Yeah, that's just so perfect, because it is about taking the initiative, isn't it? And whether it's a card in the box or some flowers left on the doorstep with a note, that makes your own sense of availability very present to the person. You know, whatever I am available, and I'm not shying away from what's happened. I think the smallest things, sometimes we can get really caught in thinking it's got to be some big gesture, or we've got to know what's going to, as you said, Jackie, with, you know, this feeling that we've got to make it better somehow, and just being able to go, actually, it's okay to not be okay. And it's okay for me not to know what I need to do. All I need to do is just take the smallest step towards the person.
Beautiful, and such, yeah, again, so practical and easy ways to do it. So I just like to express my gratitude to both of you for sharing your knowledge and wisdom and great practical examples of what we can do in this space. I think it's it's a really important thing for us all to be aware of this and considering it. And thank you to the audience today for coming along and, you know, taking the time to actually participate in this discussion. Think about it for yourself, and, you know, love to hear some of the wisdom and sharing that you're doing in your own communities, and showcase that to your own communities so that they all know and can get involved in this space and recognize that, you know, this period is different for everyone. And, you know, often we have different ways that we can network with our own communities and our own community groups. So maybe you can all start thinking about that and be that sector change that we could have in this space, and use some of these great ideas today. So next steps for everyone, we will be sending out an email to everyone following this session with an evaluation. We have 2 community webinars booked for free community webinars booked for next year. So we've got one in Advanced Care Planning Week, which is in March, on what matters most. And then we've got one in June talking to children around dying, and some expertise around that space as well that we'll be sharing with different people. So we're really excited about the next phase of this, where we'll send you out some information that's been shared today, some handouts and the PowerPoints as well. And just everyone, we just encourage you to look after yourselves and have self-care for yourself. Really do it. Find the time. We all talked about how hard that can be, but this is really important. A moment for yourself, and that moment might just be taking a deep breath and remembering being present during this time as well, and being present for those around you. So for everyone, we really thank you for participating today. We thank our wonderful speakers and the staff and everyone that came on today. Really appreciate that. And look after yourselves during the holidays. Look after your community and the people around you as well. And enjoy 2022. We can't wait to see you all then. So thank you.